I stood frozen in the corner of the room, clutching my drink like a life preserver. The corporate holiday party buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clink of glasses, but I might as well have been underwater. 30 minutes earlier, I had exhausted my repertoire of small talk with my department colleagues. Weather, covered. Weekend plans, discussed. That new restaurant downtown, opinions exchanged. Now I was adrift in a sea of strangers, my social battery depleted, watching as others seamlessly floated between conversation circles. The company's CEO approached, smiled warmly, and asked about my work. I answered with rehearsed efficiency, added a forgettable comment about quarterly goals, and then nothing. The silence expanded between us like a chasm. My mind raced for something, anything, to say next, but found only static. He nodded politely and drifted away toward more engaging company. That night, driving home, I confronted an uncomfortable truth. I had spent 15 years in education, 7 years building my career, countless hours mastering technical skills. Yet I had never learned how to connect meaningfully with another human being beyond the surface level. I could discuss projects, deliverables, and industry trends, but I could not create a genuine moment of connection with my own CEO when the opportunity presented itself. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever walked away from a social interaction feeling like you somehow failed a test you did not know you were taking? Have you watched others build instant rapport with strangers while you struggle to move beyond pleasantries? Or perhaps you can make small talk effortlessly but find yourself unable to steer conversations toward anything meaningful. The ability to engage in deep, meaningful conversations is not a mysterious talent possessed only by the socially gifted. It is a learnable skill, one that can transform every relationship in your life and fundamentally change how you experience the world around you. Before we dive into techniques and strategies, we need to understand what happens beneath the surface of truly connected conversations. Why do some interactions leave us energized and inspired while others drain us or leave no impression at all? Consider 2 scenarios from my own life. Scenario 1. Last year at an industry conference, I met Patricia Brenner, a senior director from a competitor firm. We exchanged business cards, discussed market trends, and commented on the conference speakers. The conversation was pleasant, professional, and completely forgettable. 3 months later, we ran into each other at another event and needed to reintroduce ourselves. Neither of us had formed a meaningful connection. Scenario 2. On a flight to Chicago, I was seated next to Carter Mitchell, a retired history teacher. What began as casual conversation about the book he was reading evolved into a 2-hour discussion about how historical events shaped his teaching philosophy, his most memorable students, and how education had changed throughout his 40-year career. He shared stories about growing up in rural Pennsylvania during the 1960s, and I found myself opening up about my own family history. When the flight landed, we exchanged contact information and have since met for coffee twice. One random seating assignment led to a genuine friendship. What was the difference? The surface explanation might be chemistry or common interests, but the true distinction lies deeper. In the first scenario, Patricia and I engaged in transactional communication, exchanging information without revealing anything meaningful about ourselves. In the second, Carter and I practiced transformational communication, allowing the conversation to change us in some small way by creating moments of genuine understanding. Research in interpersonal psychology shows that meaningful conversations contain 3 critical elements often missing from everyday interactions. 1. Psychological safety, the mutual understanding that both parties can speak honestly without judgment. 2. Vulnerability calibration, the appropriate sharing of personal thoughts, feelings, or experiences. 3. Curious engagement, authentic interest in understanding the other person's perspective. These elements create what communication researcher John Gottman calls sliding door moments. Opportunities to either turn toward deeper connection or maintain surface-level engagement. Most of us miss these moments not because we lack social skills, but because we have been conditioned to avoid the discomfort of authentic connection. From early childhood, we learn to keep conversations safe by discussing neutral topics, avoiding disagreement, and keeping personal disclosures to a minimum. This approach prevents social rejection but also ensures that most of our interactions remain superficial. We develop extensive vocabularies for discussing weather, sports, and entertainment while struggling to articulate our deeper thoughts, fears, and aspirations. The sociologist Sherry Tuckle describes this phenomenon as being alone together, physically present but emotionally and intellectually isolated. Her research at MIT revealed that the average American adult spends less than 10 minutes daily in deep, meaningful conversation, despite spending over 3 hours in various forms of communication. Consider this. When was the last time you left a conversation feeling truly seen and understood? When did you last learn something surprising about someone you thought you knew well? If these experiences are rare in your life, you are not alone. But you are missing out on one of the most profound aspects of human experience. The good news? The ability to create these connections can be developed through conscious practice. The barriers to deep conversation are not mysterious or insurmountable. They are habitual patterns that can be replaced with more effective approaches. This brings us to an intriguing question. If deep connection is so rewarding, why do we instinctively avoid it? What exactly happens in our brains when we face the prospect of moving beyond small talk? Let us begin with a surprising truth. Your brain interprets social rejection in the same way it processes physical pain. Neuroimaging studies show that the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region that activates when you experience physical pain, also activates when you feel socially excluded or rejected. This explains why deep conversations feel inherently risky. Every moment of vulnerability is processed by your brain as a potential threat to your safety. Your nervous system does not distinguish between the risk of physical harm and the risk of social rejection. Both trigger the same fundamental stress response. Think about the last time you considered sharing something personal in a conversation but held back. Perhaps you wanted to express a controversial opinion, reveal a struggle you were facing, or simply ask a more meaningful question. What stopped you? The most common barriers to conversational depth include 1. Fear of judgment, the concern that revealing our authentic thoughts will result in negative evaluation. 2. Conversational narcissism, the habit of redirecting dialogue back to ourselves rather than exploring others' experiences. 3. Emotional forecasting errors, inaccurately predicting how others will respond to our disclosures. 4. Comfort addiction, preferring the predictability of small talk over the uncertainty of meaningful exchange. These barriers create what psychologists call pluralistic ignorance, a situation where everyone privately desires deeper connection but publicly conforms to superficial norms because they believe others prefer shallow interaction. Research from the University of Chicago illustrates this phenomenon perfectly. In a series of experiments, researchers Nicholas Epley and Juliana Schroeder paired strangers for conversations of varying depth. Before the interactions, participants predicted they would feel uncomfortable in deeper conversations and preferred small talk. The results? Participants consistently reported greater enjoyment, connection, and happiness following substantive conversations compared to small talk, the exact opposite of their predictions. The implication is both profound and practical. We avoid the very conversations that would bring us the greatest satisfaction because we mispredict how they will feel. But this raises another question. How do you bridge this gap? How do you move from surface-level pleasantries to meaningful exchange without creating awkwardness or overstepping boundaries? The answer lies in understanding conversation as a skill rather than a talent, one built on learnable techniques rather than innate charisma or extroversion. Consider the example of my colleague Ryan, an engineer who believed himself conversationally challenged throughout his 20s. Social gatherings were exercises in endurance rather than enjoyment. When I met him at age 35, however, he had transformed into someone who could connect effortlessly with strangers from all backgrounds. His secret? After particularly painful social embarrassment at a company retreat, he began studying conversation as systematically as he had studied engineering. He identified patterns in successful social interactions, practiced specific techniques, and gradually rebuilt his approach to human connection. I realized that deep conversation follows predictable patterns, Ryan explained. There are entry points, escalation signals, and navigational tools that anyone can learn. Once I understood the structure, I could focus on the content rather than worrying about the process. Ryan's experience illustrates a critical insight. Conversational depth does not require extraordinary social intelligence. It requires understanding the architecture of meaningful exchange and applying specific techniques at the right moments. Consider the contrast between these two approaches to the same conversational opportunity. Approach 1. What do you do for work? Response: I am a graphic designer. Follow-up: that is interesting. I have a friend who does that. Conversation likely moves to another topic or stalls. Approach 2. What do you do for work? Response: I am a graphic designer. Follow-up: what aspects of design sparked your interest initially? Has that changed over time? Conversation explores personal journey, creative process, and evolution. The second approach employs what conversation analysts call a depth probe, a question that moves beyond factual information to explore meaning, motivation, or personal experience. Such questions transform mundane topics into opportunities for connection by signaling genuine interest in the other person's inner world. But depth probes are just one tool in the conversationalist's toolkit. To truly master meaningful dialogue, we need to understand the complete framework of conversational intelligence, the skills that allow some people to create connection in even the most challenging circumstances. This brings us to the heart of our exploration. What specific techniques separate superficial exchanges from conversations that create lasting impact? And more importantly, how can you implement these techniques in your everyday interactions? The answer begins with understanding the difference between conversational tactics and conversational strategy. Tactics are specific techniques used in the moment: effective questions, active listening practices, disclosure calibration. Strategy is the overarching approach that guides when and how those tactics are deployed. Most people focus exclusively on tactics, memorizing questions or practicing listening techniques, without developing the strategic awareness that makes those tactics effective. This is like learning individual chess moves without understanding board position or game strategy. True conversational mastery requires both tactical skill and strategic awareness. You must know what to say, how to listen, and most importantly, how to read the subtle cues that indicate when to employ different approaches. Take the case of Patricia, a marketing executive who struggled with networking events despite being articulate and knowledgeable. Her problem was not tactical. She knew how to ask good questions and could speak eloquently about her work. Her challenge was strategic. She could not identify the right moments to transition between different conversational modes or recognize when others were signaling openness to deeper exchange. Working together, we identified her strategic blind spots and developed awareness of key transitional moments in conversation. Within months, she reported not only greater social comfort, but also more meaningful professional relationships and better client outcomes. I used to think some people were just naturally good at connecting, she told me. Now I realize they are simply better at reading conversational currents and navigating them intentionally. This brings us to a fundamental question. What exactly are these conversational currents, and how can you learn to navigate them? Psychologist Robert Hare describes 5 distinct levels of conversational depth. Level 1, environmental, discussion of immediate surroundings or shared circumstances. Level 2, factual, exchange of objective information and general knowledge. Level 3, personal sharing of individual preferences, opinions, and experiences. Level 4, vulnerable disclosure of fears, aspirations, and emotional realities. Level 5, universal exploration of shared human experiences and philosophical questions. Most casual interactions never progress beyond Level 2, and many relationships remain permanently fixed at Level 3. The most meaningful connections, however, regularly navigate between Levels 3, 4, and 5, creating a dance between personal disclosure, vulnerable sharing, and exploration of universal themes. The key insight is that these levels are not reached through random chance or special chemistry. They are accessed through specific conversational moves that can be learned, practiced, and mastered. Consider this real-world example from a workshop participant named Marcus. I had known my colleague Jordan for 3 years. We had lunch together weekly but never discussed anything beyond work and occasional sports talk. After learning about conversational levels, I intentionally shifted our lunch discussion from our current project, Level 2, to how we each ended up in our field, Level 3. This simple shift led to discovering his previous career as a social worker and the personal experience that motivated that choice. Level 4. 2 hours later, we were discussing how career choices reflect our deeper values and purpose. Level 5. In one conversation, our 3-year acquaintanceship transformed into a meaningful friendship, all because I recognized the opportunity to change conversational levels. This example illustrates an important principle. Deepening conversation requires recognizing transition opportunities and having the techniques to navigate them successfully. But this raises another critical question. How do you identify these transition points, and what specific techniques allow you to move through them naturally? The answer lies in understanding 4 key transition signals. 1. Emotional disclosure, when someone reveals how they feel about a topic rather than just factual information. 2. Value statements, when someone expresses what matters to them or why something is important. 3. Identity markers, when someone reveals an aspect of how they see themselves or their life story. 4. Curiosity signals, when someone expresses genuine interest in exploring a topic further. These signals represent openings for deeper conversation. Moments when the other person is indicating readiness to move beyond surface exchange. The skilled conversationalist recognizes these signals and responds with appropriate techniques to explore the opening without forcing uncomfortable disclosure. For example, when someone makes an emotional disclosure, "I was really disappointed with how the project turned out." Most people respond with problem-solving, reassurance, or their own similar experience. The skilled conversationalist instead uses this opening to explore the emotional landscape behind the statement. What aspects were most disappointing to you? Or, how did you want it to turn out? This approach, what psychologists call emotional validation with curious exploration, communicates understanding while creating space for deeper sharing. It transforms a potential conversational dead end into a pathway toward meaningful connection. But recognizing transition opportunities is only half the equation. You must also develop specific techniques for navigating each level of conversation effectively. This brings us to the tactical framework that transforms theoretical understanding into practical skill. The breakthrough moment in mastering meaningful conversation comes when you stop seeing dialogue as a linear exchange of information and start recognizing it as a dynamic dance of connection. This shift transforms your entire approach from "what should I say next?" to "where are we in this conversational journey, and what would create value at this moment?" This perspective shift is the foundation of what I call the conversational intelligence framework, a comprehensive system for creating meaningful connection through strategic awareness and tactical skill. The framework consists of 3 core components: attunement, navigation, and revelation. Attunement is the practice of fully engaging with the conversation through both external awareness, what the other person is communicating, and internal awareness, your own reactions and responses. This dual awareness creates the foundation for genuine connection. Most people believe they practice attunement naturally, but research suggests otherwise. Studies of conversational dynamics reveal that the average person interrupts or begins formulating their response within 8 to 11 seconds of the other person speaking. True attunement requires overriding this natural tendency through intentional practices. The core techniques of attunement include presence anchoring. Before important conversations, take 3 deep breaths while mentally stating your intention to be fully present. This simple practice activates the parasympathetic nervous system, counteracting the fight-or-flight response that often triggers conversational anxiety. Research from Harvard Medical School demonstrates that this brief physiological reset can improve attention, reduce reactivity, and enhance conversational presence. Participants who practice presence anchoring before social interactions reported 37% greater satisfaction with their conversations and demonstrated significantly better recall of conversational details. 3-channel listening. Effective listening operates on 3 simultaneous channels. Content listening, what is being said, facts, information, stories. Emotional listening, how it is being said, tone, energy, emotional subtext. Intentional listening, why it is being said, underlying needs, values, or desires. Most people focus exclusively on content listening while missing crucial information from the emotional and intentional channels. By consciously tracking all 3 channels, You develop a richer understanding of the other person and identify opportunities for deeper connection. Reflective curiosity. This technique involves briefly summarizing what you have understood and then asking a question that explores the meaning, motivation, or emotional landscape behind the information shared. For example, standard response, "That sounds challenging." Reflective curiosity. "It sounds like you were facing significant pressure with those deadlines. What was that experience like for you internally?" The difference might seem subtle, but the impact is profound. The first response acknowledges but closes the topic. The second validates the experience while creating space for deeper exploration. Navigation encompasses the skills of guiding conversation toward meaningful exchange without forcing unnatural disclosure or creating awkwardness. This component addresses the most common question in conversational development. How do I move beyond small talk without seeming invasive or awkward? The key to effective navigation lies in understanding the natural pathways between conversational levels and developing techniques for moving along these pathways at the appropriate pace. The most important navigation techniques include contextual bridging. This technique creates natural transitions between conversational levels by connecting new questions to previously shared information. Rather than abruptly changing topics or asking disconnected questions, contextual bridging uses the current conversation as a pathway to deeper territory. For example, abrupt transition. "So, what motivates you in life?" Contextual bridge. "You mentioned enjoying the creative aspects of your work. What other forms of creativity or expression matter to you outside of work?" The contextual bridge feels natural rather than jarring because it connects to established conversational territory before expanding into new areas. Value mining. Every conversation contains clues about what matters to the other person, their values, priorities, and interests. Value mining involves identifying these clues and exploring them through thoughtful questions. When someone mentions loving the freedom of their job, most people continue discussing the job itself. The skilled navigator recognizes freedom as a value marker and explores it. Freedom seems important to you. How does that value show up in other areas of your life? This technique transforms factual disclosure into meaningful exchange by focusing on the values underlying the information shared. Disclosure calibration. Meaningful conversation requires appropriate vulnerability, but mismatched disclosure creates discomfort. Disclosure calibration involves matching or slightly exceeding the other person's level of openness to create balanced vulnerability. For example, if someone shares a professional challenge, responding with a deeply personal struggle would create imbalance. Conversely, responding to personal disclosure with mere facts creates distance. Effective calibration maintains the right vulnerability ratio for building trust gradually. Research from social psychologist Arthur Aaron demonstrates that properly calibrated mutual disclosure activates the brain's reward centers, creating positive association with the conversation and the relationship. This explains why appropriately matched vulnerability feels satisfying rather than uncomfortable. Revelation encompasses the practices that transform good conversation into profound connection through mutual understanding and shared insight. While attunement creates presence and navigation creates movement, revelation creates depth and meaning. The key techniques of revelation include insight questioning. Unlike conventional questions that seek information, insight questions invite reflection and discovery. These questions help people articulate thoughts they may not have previously verbalized, creating moments of genuine revelation. Standard question: do you like your job? Insight question: what aspects of your work make you lose track of time? Standard question: where did you grow up? Insight question: how did where you grew up shape who you are today? Insight questions create space for meaningful reflection rather than rehearsed answers. They signal genuine interest in the other person's inner experience and often lead to surprising discoveries for both participants. Sacred holding. This advanced technique involves creating space for emotional processing without attempting to solve, fix, or redirect. When someone shares something deeply meaningful or challenging, our instinct is often to offer solutions, relate similar experiences, or provide reassurance. Sacred holding involves simply acknowledging the significance of what has been shared and allowing space for its full expression. For example, When someone reveals a profound disappointment or loss, sacred holding might involve saying, "That sounds incredibly difficult. I appreciate you sharing that with me," followed by attentive silence rather than immediate redirection to another topic. This practice, what psychologist Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard, creates profound safety for authentic expression and often leads to the most meaningful moments in conversation. Connection anchoring. Meaningful conversations often produce moments of genuine connection or mutual understanding. Connection anchoring involves explicitly acknowledging these moments to cement their impact and create foundation for future depth. For example, what you just described about balancing ambition with presence, that really resonates with my own experience. I have not heard anyone articulate it quite that way before. This practice validates the significance of the exchange and creates a shared reference point for future conversations. Research in relationship psychology shows that explicitly acknowledging moments of connection significantly increases interpersonal bonding and relationship satisfaction. The conversational intelligence framework transforms theoretical understanding into practical skill by providing specific techniques for each phase of meaningful dialogue. But knowing the techniques is not enough. You must develop the strategic awareness to deploy them effectively in real-world situations. This brings us to the implementation phase. How do you develop conversational intelligence in your everyday interactions? The transition from understanding conversational principles to embodying them requires deliberate practice in 3 key domains: mindset development, skill building, and real-world application. Let us explore each of these domains and identify specific practices for mastering them. Conversational intelligence begins with cultivating the internal conditions that make meaningful exchange possible. The most crucial mindset shifts include, from performance to presence. Many conversational struggles stem from self-consciousness, the feeling of being on stage during social interactions. This performance mindset creates anxiety, reduces authenticity, and prevents true connection. The antidote is practicing presence orientation, focusing on the experience of the conversation rather than your performance within it. This shift is achieved through regular mindfulness practice and specific pre-conversation rituals. Try this. Before your next important conversation, take 30 seconds to ask yourself, what am I curious about with this person? This simple question redirects attention from self-evaluation to genuine engagement. From outcome to process. Meaningful conversations cannot be forced or manufactured. They emerge naturally when we focus on the conversational journey rather than predetermined destinations. Develop process orientation by releasing attachment to specific outcomes in conversation. Rather than entering social situations with goals like make a good impression or get useful information, focus on goals like be fully present or discover something interesting. From scarcity to abundance. Many people approach conversation from a scarcity mindset, believing there is limited time, attention, or interest available. This creates rushing, interrupting, and anxiety about getting to the point. Cultivate conversational abundance by trusting that meaningful exchange creates expanding rather than diminishing returns. When conversations become genuinely engaging, time constraints often become flexible, and shared attention becomes a renewable rather than limited resource. Conversational intelligence requires developing specific capabilities through deliberate practice. The most important skills include question crafting. The questions you ask quite literally create the conversational space you inhabit. Developing a repertoire of thoughtful questions transforms your ability to create meaningful dialogue. Practice by creating a question journal, where you record effective questions you encounter or develop. Review and refine these questions regularly, noting which ones consistently create meaningful exchange. Categorize your questions by conversational level: factual, personal, vulnerable, universal, and context, professional, social, intimate. This practice builds a mental library you can access in various situations. Disclosure calibration. Appropriate vulnerability is essential for meaningful connection, but calibrating disclosure requires practice and awareness. Develop this skill by intentionally varying your disclosure level in low-risk conversations. Notice how different levels of openness affect conversational depth and comfort. Pay attention to how others respond to various types of disclosure and adjust accordingly. The goal is not to become calculated or manipulative, but to develop intuitive understanding of how disclosure functions in building connection. Conversational recovery. Even skilled conversationalists encounter awkward moments, misunderstandings, and conversational dead ends. The difference lies in their ability to recover gracefully. Build recovery skills by practicing conversational repairs when interactions become strained or awkward. Rather than avoiding discomfort through topic changes, acknowledge the moment directly. I feel like I might have misunderstood what you were sharing. Could you help me understand better? This direct approach, what communication experts call metacommunication, transforms potentially awkward moments into opportunities for deeper understanding. Conversational intelligence ultimately develops through applied practice in varied contexts. The most effective application strategies include graduated exposure. Begin practicing deeper conversation in low-risk environments before attempting challenging contexts. This creates competence and confidence that transfers to more demanding situations. Start with trusted friends, supportive colleagues, or family members. As your skills develop, gradually expand to less familiar relationships and more challenging contexts. Targeted skill focus. Rather than attempting to implement all techniques simultaneously, focus on developing one specific skill in each conversation. This concentrated attention accelerates mastery without creating overwhelming complexity. For example, you might focus exclusively on three-channel listening in one conversation, insight questioning in another, and disclosure calibration in a third. This targeted approach creates noticeable improvement in specific areas while building toward comprehensive skill integration. Reflection practice. Conversational skill develops fastest when practice is paired with structured reflection. After significant conversations, take 5 minutes to review what worked well, what could be improved, and what you learned about effective dialogue. This practice, what psychologists call deliberate reflection, dramatically accelerates skill development by transforming experience into insight and insight into adaptation. To implement these principles immediately, commit to the 3-conversation challenge. 1. Identify 3 people in your life with whom you would like to develop deeper connection. 2. Schedule a conversation with each person within the next week. 3. Before each conversation, select one specific technique from the framework to practice. 4. After each conversation, spend 5 minutes reflecting on what you learned. 5. Record your insights and adapt your approach for the next conversation. This simple practice creates a structured pathway for developing conversational intelligence through real-world application. By focusing on specific techniques, practicing in varied contexts, and reflecting on your experience, you build the practical skills that transform theoretical understanding into embodied capability. As you implement these practices, remember that conversational mastery is not about perfection but progress. Every interaction, even those that feel awkward or unsuccessful, contributes to your development if approached with curiosity and openness to learning. This brings us to perhaps the most important question in our exploration. How does mastering meaningful conversation transform not just your interactions but your entire experience of life and relationship? The ability to create meaningful conversation is not merely a social skill. It is a profound life capability that transforms how you experience yourself, others, and the world around you. As you develop conversational intelligence, several remarkable changes occur. First, your experience of social interaction fundamentally shifts. What was once draining or anxiety-producing becomes energizing and life-giving. The social world transforms from a field of potential judgment to a landscape of discovery and connection. Consider the experience of Michael, a software engineer who participated in conversational intelligence training. I used to dread social events and would need days to recover from them. Now I find myself looking forward to opportunities for connection. The difference is not that I have become more extroverted. I still value and need solitude, but that my experience of social interaction has completely transformed. I no longer feel depleted by conversation because I am not performing or defending but genuinely engaging. Second, your relationships develop unprecedented depth and meaning. When you can create conditions for authentic exchange, connections that once remained perpetually superficial begin to reveal their potential for genuine intimacy and understanding. Jessica, a healthcare executive, described this transformation. I had known my closest colleagues for years, but our interactions remained largely professional despite spending 40 hours weekly together. After developing conversational skills, I discovered depths to these relationships I never imagined possible. One colleague I had worked alongside for 8 years shared her experience as a first-generation college student and how it shaped her approach to leadership. Another revealed his journey through depression and how it informed his empathy for patients. These were not people unwilling to connect. They were simply waiting for the right conversational environment to share their authentic selves. Third, your access to wisdom and insight expands exponentially. When you can engage deeply with diverse perspectives, your understanding of complex issues develops nuance and sophistication impossible to achieve through isolated contemplation. Thomas, a city council member, noted, "I used to approach community issues with firm opinions and ready solutions. As I developed skill in meaningful conversation, I began having deeper exchanges with constituents across political and social divides. These conversations transformed my understanding of complex issues and helped me develop approaches that addressed multiple perspectives rather than imposing single viewpoints. My effectiveness as a public servant fundamentally changed when I learned to create spaces for authentic dialogue rather than debate." Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, your relationship with yourself transforms. The skills of attunement, curiosity, and presence that you develop for external conversation naturally extend to your internal dialogue. Many people report that as their conversational intelligence develops, their self-awareness deepens and their internal critical voice softens. Sarah, a marketing director, described this unexpected benefit. "The most surprising outcome of developing these skills has been how my relationship with myself has changed. The same compassionate curiosity I learned to bring to difficult conversations with others, I now bring to my own thoughts and feelings. When I experience confusion or strong emotion, I find myself naturally asking the kind of insightful questions I would ask someone else. This internal conversation has become much more supportive and productive than the self-criticism that once dominated my thinking." These transformations illustrate why conversational intelligence represents one of the most powerful forms of personal development. It simultaneously transforms your social experience, your relationships, your access to wisdom, and your relationship with yourself. As you continue developing your conversational capabilities, remember that the ultimate purpose of this work is not social performance or interpersonal control, but the creation of genuine human connection. The techniques and frameworks are valuable only to the extent that they serve this deeper purpose. In a world increasingly characterized by polarization, isolation, and superficial engagement, the ability to create spaces for authentic dialogue is not merely a personal skill but a social contribution. Each meaningful conversation you initiate creates ripples of connection that extend far beyond the immediate interaction. Begin today. In your very next conversation, bring one element of what you have learned, perhaps a moment of true presence, a question of genuine curiosity, or the courage to share something authentically meaningful. This single step initiates a journey of transformation that will enrich every relationship in your life. Remember that mastery develops not through occasional extraordinary efforts, but through consistent small practices. Every conversation is an opportunity to grow, connect, and contribute to a world hungry for genuine understanding. The art of meaningful conversation is the gateway to a life of authentic connection. Start where you are, use what you have learned, and watch as your relational world transforms one conversation at a time. The ability to create deep conversations with anyone isn't just a social skill. It's the foundation upon which meaningful relationships, profound understanding, and genuine belonging are built throughout a lifetime.